The moment Maureen walked out that door, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of me. The steam had faded, just like the warmth in our marriage. She had told me it was just a weekend away, that she needed time to reconnect with herself. But deep down I knew. A husband always knows. The past few months had been filled with late nights at work, distant conversations, and a phone that always seemed to be turned face down. I had pretended not to notice, convincing myself that I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid. But as I listened to the fading sound of her car pulling out of the driveway, I felt something strange. Relief. Not fear. Not devastation. Just a quiet, unexpected relief. And that's when I realized I didn't have to wait. I didn't have to sit here and pretend like I was some loyal dog waiting at the door for his owner to return. Maureen thought she had all the power in this marriage, that she could step out, explore whatever she wanted, and come back to a husband who would still be standing in the same place, waiting for her to decide his fate. She was wrong. I wasn't waiting. I was done. And by the time she came back, she wouldn't be coming home to the same man she left. The house felt different after she left. Lighter. As if, for the first time in years, I could actually breathe. I stood up from the table, stretching my arms, feeling an unfamiliar sense of freedom settle over me. It was strange. There should have been pain, anger, confusion. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of release. I wasn't naive. I knew where she had gone. Maureen had been restless for months, looking at me like I was some worn-out book she had already read too many times. The little things had given her away, the sudden need to go out more, the extra effort she put into her appearance when she was going out with the girls, the way her phone was always just out of my reach, and the way she had packed her suitcase so easily. I walked into her bedroom, taking in the half-empty closet. Her side of the bed was still unmade, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the sheets. But it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a reset. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my hands over my face. The truth was, I had been living on autopilot for too long. Stuck in a marriage that felt more like an obligation than a partnership. I had let myself believe that love was supposed to feel like this, like something that dulled over time, like something that was just endured. But why? Why was I holding on to something that was already gone? A small, bitter chuckle escaped my lips. Maureen had thought she was the one in control. That she was calling the shots. That she could go off on her little adventure, get her thrill, and come back to the man who would always be waiting. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't waiting. I had already moved on. And by the time she came back, she wouldn't recognize the life she left behind. That first night alone, I expected to feel uneasy. Maybe even heartbroken. But instead, our house felt like an empty hotel room. A place I had stayed in for too long, waiting for something that was never going to happen. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was liberating. I walked through the living room, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The framed wedding photo on the shelf, it suddenly looked like strangers frozen in time. I picked it up, running a finger over the glass. The woman in the picture was smiling, but I barely recognized her anymore. Or maybe I had never really seen her. I placed it face down on the table. I wasn't sure why, but I knew I didn't want to look at it anymore. I made my way to the bedroom, but as I reached for the door, something stopped me. A weird hesitation. Like stepping back into that room would be stepping into something I no longer belonged to. Instead, I turned around and went to the guest room. It was smaller. Simpler. Just a bed, a desk, a nightstand. But for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of someone else's presence pressing down on me. No expectations. No wondering if the person beside me was awake, scrolling through her phone, waiting for me to fall asleep first. Just peace. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was barely rising, painting the sky in dull shades of pink and gray. I stretched, feeling a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. It was a Saturday. A weekend. A weekend where I didn't have to pretend. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the world wake up around me. Birds chirped, cars hummed in the distance, life moved on just like I was about to. I grabbed my phone and hesitated. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to check if Maureen had texted me. I knew she wouldn't. And I didn't care. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled down. There was a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Angela. We used to be close. Before marriage. Before life got complicated. Before Maureen had slowly cut me off from the people who once mattered. I hovered over the call button. Would it be weird after all these years? Then I remembered I don't owe Maureen anything. I hit the call button. It rang twice before I heard a familiar voice. Joel? Wow, this is a surprise. I smiled. Yeah. It's been a while. A pause. Then a soft laugh. Yeah, it really has. And just like that, the weekend Maureen thought would put our marriage on pause turned into something else entirely. A weekend of new beginnings. I spent most of the morning catching up with Angela. It was surreal hearing her voice again after so many years. There was something refreshing about talking to someone who knew the old me, the version of myself before I became the man who walked on eggshells, who ignored his gut instincts, who settled for a life that wasn't truly his. Angela and I had history. Not the kind of history that complicates things, but the kind that reminds you of who you were before life reshaped you into something unrecognizable. We talked about everything: work, travel, the people we had lost touch with. I told her about the house, how it felt so foreign without Maureen in it. She told me about her own life, how she had moved back into town after years of living elsewhere. So, what's new with you? She finally asked, her voice carrying an edge of curiosity. I hesitated. Should I tell her? Should I say the words out loud? My wife left for the weekend, I said, choosing my words carefully. To explore something new. Angela went quiet for a second, then let out a small, sharp laugh. Let me guess, she expects you to just wait for her to come back like nothing happened? I exhaled, shaking my head. That's the thing. I don't think I care if she comes back at all. Silence. Then a soft chuckle. Joel? I don't think you realize how huge that is. Maybe she was right. Maybe without even knowing it I had already let go. We wrapped up the conversation after a while, promising to meet up soon. And as I hung up I felt something stir inside me. Not guilt. Not hesitation. Excitement. I stepped back inside and took a long, hard look at the house. For years it had been a museum of Maureen's tastes. The sleek, modern furniture. The neutral colors. The picture-perfect arrangement of books and decorations, nothing ever out of place. Even the scent of the house was hers: lavender and vanilla candles, expensive lotions, the faintest trace of perfume lingering in the air. But for the first time I saw it for what it really was. A stage. A perfectly curated performance of a marriage that had been hollow for years. I ran my hand over the marble kitchen counter, remembering all the nights she had sat here, pretending to listen as I talked about my day. How many times had I convinced myself she was just tired when she barely acknowledged me? How many times had I ignored the feeling in my gut that told me she had already checked out of this marriage long before this weekend? Too many. I opened the cabinets, pulling out one of the expensive wine glasses she had insisted on buying. I stared at it for a moment before setting it down on the counter with a sharp clink. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I turned on the old stereo I had kept tucked away in the closet, the one Maureen always said was an eyesore. Within seconds, the house was filled with music. Not the soft, trendy background music she always played when we had guests over. Real music. Music I loved. The kind that made me feel something. I turned up the volume, grabbed my coffee, and leaned against the counter, letting the sound fill the empty spaces Maureen had left behind. And for the first time in years, the house finally felt like mine. I was in the middle of cleaning out the living room when my phone buzzed. A text. Maureen. I felt my stomach tighten, but not in the way it used to. No dread. No anticipation. Just curiosity. Hey, hope you're doing okay. Won't have service for a while. Talk soon. I stared at the message for a moment. No apology. No affection. Just a placeholder. A way to keep me anchored while she did whatever it was she had left to do. She still thought I was waiting. I smirked, typing a quick reply. Enjoy your weekend. And that was it. No questions. No desperation. Just a simple, detached sentence that told her everything she needed to know. She had left thinking she still held all the control. She was wrong. That night I did something I never thought I'd do. I took off my wedding ring. Not in anger. Not in some dramatic moment of grief. I simply removed it. Set it on the nightstand. Stared at the empty space on my finger. And realized. I felt lighter. Freer. By the time Maureen came back, she wouldn't recognize the man she left behind. And something told me she wasn't going to like what she found. The next morning, I woke up before the sun had fully risen. It wasn't intentional. I didn't set an alarm or force myself to get out of bed early. It just happened. And for the first time in years, I felt rested. Not the kind of rest that comes from just sleeping, but the kind that comes from knowing you're no longer waiting for something that's never coming back. I sat up, rubbing my hands over my face, letting the realization settle in. Maureen was gone. And instead of feeling like something had been taken from me, I felt like something had been returned. Myself. I spent the morning doing things I hadn't done in years. Simple things. I made breakfast for myself, not just a quick coffee and toast like I had gotten used to, but a real breakfast. Eggs. Bacon. Freshly squeezed orange juice. The kind of breakfast I used to enjoy before I let my life revolve around Maureen's routine. I ate at the dining table, a place we had barely used because Maureen preferred eating in front of the TV. Then, after I was done, I did something that felt almost ceremonial. I cleaned out my closet. One by one, I pulled out clothes I hadn't worn in years. Shirts I had bought because Maureen liked them. Jackets that didn't really fit my style but had somehow become part of my wardrobe. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was about ownership. For so long, my life had been shaped by someone else's preferences. The way I dressed. The way I decorated my home. The way I spent my time. And now? Now I was taking it all back. I packed up an entire box of clothes and dropped it off at a donation center before noon. When I came back home, the closet looked different. Lighter. Just like everything else in my life. Later that afternoon, I got a text. Angela. Hey, I was thinking about our conversation. Are you free tonight? Let's grab a drink and catch up properly. I stared at the message for a long time. And then, without hesitation, I replied. Sounds good. Where and when? That night, I stood in front of my mirror, looking at myself as I buttoned up a shirt, one I actually liked this time. It had been a long time since I had gone out for no reason other than to enjoy myself. For years, my nights had been dictated by Maureen's schedule. What she wanted to do. What she was in the mood for. Tonight was different. Tonight, I was stepping out for myself. I arrived at the bar a little early. It was a cozy spot, warm lighting, soft music, the kind of place where conversations flowed naturally. When Angela walked in, she spotted me instantly, flashing a grin as she made her way over. Wow, she said as she took a seat. You look different. I raised an eyebrow. That a good thing? She laughed, tilting her head slightly. Definitely. We ordered drinks and fell into effortless conversation. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two old friends catching up after years apart. And somewhere between the stories, the laughter, and the comfortable silence, I realized something. I wasn't thinking about Maureen. Not once. She had left for the weekend thinking she was setting herself free. But in the end, I was the one who had finally let go. Sunday night arrived faster than I expected. The weekend had been a strange mix of clarity, liberation, and quiet self-reflection. I had spent time with myself in a way I hadn't in years, and for once I wasn't afraid of the silence. But as I sat on the couch, sipping a glass of bourbon, I heard it, the familiar hum of tires pulling into the driveway. Maureen was back. I didn't move right away. I just sat there, letting the moment sink in. A few days ago, I might have been waiting for this moment with anticipation, wondering what she would say, how she would act, whether she would come back to me like she always did. But now? Now, she was just a person walking back into a life that no longer belonged to her. The front door clicked open. Her heels clacked against the hardwood floor as she stepped inside. I finally turned my head and met her eyes. She looked surprised. Like she had expected to walk into a house where I was still waiting. Hey, she said, shifting her bag on her shoulder. I'm back. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I just took another sip of my drink, letting her words hang in the air. Finally, I leaned back and exhaled. I see that. Silence. She set her bag down near the door and slowly walked further into the house. I could tell she was studying me, looking for any sign of resentment, sadness, desperation. She found none. You okay? She asked. I let out a quiet chuckle. Yeah, I really am. And that was the first moment where I saw it, realization dawning in her eyes. This wasn't the reaction she had expected. She thought she would come home to the same old routine. A husband who would tiptoe around her, waiting for an explanation. Instead, she came home to a man who had already moved on. She sat across from me at the kitchen island, rubbing her hands together as if trying to figure out what to say. I waited. Finally, she sighed. This weekend was eye-opening. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She hesitated before continuing. I needed time to figure things out. To see if what I was feeling was real. Ah, there it was. The carefully chosen words. The vague attempt to justify what she had done without fully admitting it. I knew she had spent the weekend with someone else. I knew that before she even left. But now, hearing her dance around it, trying to explain it in a way that softened the blow, it was almost comical. I tilted my head. And? What did you figure out? She looked up, finally meeting my gaze. That I still want this. Us. That I don't want to throw away everything we've built. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Not because I believed her. But because I had expected this exact moment. The moment when she realized the grass wasn't greener. The moment when she saw that I wasn't the desperate, lovesick husband she had assumed I would always be. She had gone away to explore. And now that she was back, she wanted to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had. I stood up, grabbing my glass and walking over to the sink. I took my time rinsing it out before setting it down. Then I turned back to face her. "You didn't just take a trip, Maureen," I said calmly. "You made a choice." Her breath hitched slightly. "Joel?" "I spent the weekend thinking too," I cut her off. "And I realized something." She swallowed hard. "What?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "I don't want this anymore." Her face fell. "You're just saying that because you're hurt," she said quickly, her voice rushing with panic. I shook my head. "No, Maureen. I'm saying it because I finally understand something." I exhaled, letting the weight of my own words settle in. I deserve better than a wife who sees our marriage as something she can put on pause whenever she feels like it. Silence. And in that silence I saw it. Fear. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the stability she had taken for granted. "You're serious," she whispered. I nodded. "I'm done waiting," I said simply. And by the time you walked back through that door, I had already moved on. I watched as her expression shifted from shock to something colder. She straightened up, her lips pressing together. "So, that's it? You're just throwing it all away?" I let out a quiet laugh. "No, Maureen. You did. The second you walked out that door." Her eyes flashed with frustration. "You don't even know what I did this weekend." I tilted my head. "Do I need to?" She flinched. Because we both knew the answer. She didn't leave right away. She lingered. Like she was waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. And when she finally did grab her bag and walk back out that door, I didn't watch her go. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back anymore. I was only looking forward. And damn, did it feel good. The door shut behind her, but the weight of her presence still lingered in the air. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the space she had just occupied, feeling nothing. No sadness. No regret. Just an overwhelming sense of finality. It was strange how quickly things could shift. For years, I had been walking through this house, through this marriage, thinking that if I just kept going, if I just held on, things would get better. That if I kept adjusting, compromising, making excuses for her emotional distance, I could somehow salvage what we had. But standing there, in the silence she left behind, I finally understood. I was never holding on to anything real. I was clinging to an illusion. And now? Now I was free. I didn't clean up the dishes. I didn't straighten the pillows on the couch. I didn't do any of the little things I usually did to keep the house in perfect order, to make it feel like a home. Because this house wasn't a home. Not anymore. Instead, I grabbed my keys, slipped on my jacket, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant rain. It had rained earlier in the evening, leaving the pavement slick and dark beneath the streetlights. I took a deep breath and started walking. No destination. No plan. Just movement. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't wondering what she was doing, where she was, who she had been with. I wasn't waiting for answers that no longer mattered. I was just existing. And it felt good. Half an hour later, I found myself standing in front of a familiar door. Angela's door. I hadn't planned on coming here. But my feet had carried me as if my body knew something my mind hadn't quite admitted yet. Before I could overthink it, I knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. Angela stood there wearing an oversized sweater, her hair slightly messy, her expression shifting from surprise to curiosity in the span of a breath. "Joel," she said, tilting her head. "What are you doing here?" I exhaled, shoving my hands into my pockets. "Honestly? I don't know." She studied me for a second, then stepped aside. "Come in." I hesitated for half a heartbeat, then stepped inside. Angela's apartment was warm and inviting, the opposite of my house. Books stacked on the coffee table. A record player in the corner, softly humming an old jazz tune. A couch that actually looked lived in. She walked into the kitchen, grabbing 2 glasses and pouring us both something dark and strong. "So," she said, handing me a glass. "I take it the wife's back?" I smirked, shaking my head. "Not for long." Her eyebrow arched, but she didn't press. Instead, she sat down on the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. I sat beside her, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. She thought she could just walk back in like nothing happened. Angela let out a dry chuckle. "They always do." I turned my head toward her. "You say that like you've seen it before." She shrugged. "I have. More times than I care to admit." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. After a moment, she spoke again. "So, what now?" I leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. "Now?" I let out a slow breath, letting the weight of my words settle in. "Now I start over." Angela nodded, raising her glass in a silent toast. I clinked mine against hers, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope. And maybe, just maybe, the best part of my life was only just beginning. I woke up the next morning feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Light. For years, I had been carrying the weight of a marriage that had been crumbling under its own neglect. I had let myself believe that love meant endurance, that commitment meant sacrifice, even when I was the only one making them. But now? Now, I felt free. I sat up in Angela's guest room, stretching as the morning light filtered in through the curtains. It was a modest space, no fancy decorations, no meticulously curated furniture, just a place that felt real. The kind of place where someone actually lived. And maybe that was the biggest difference. I had spent years living in a house that was designed to look perfect from the outside, but it had never been a home. This was different. I got up, ran a hand through my hair, and stepped out into the hallway. The smell of fresh coffee hit me before I even made it to the kitchen. Angela was there, already awake, leaning against the counter with a steaming mug in her hands. She glanced at me and smirked. "Morning, stranger." I chuckled. "Morning." She held up a second cup, wordlessly offering it to me. I took it, the warmth sinking into my fingers. For a moment, we just stood there, sipping coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. Then she tilted her head. "So, how do you feel?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. And then I smiled. Like I just got my life back. Angela nodded, a knowing glint in her eyes. Good. And it was good. For the first time, I wasn't looking at my past with regret. I wasn't thinking about what I had lost, what I had endured, or what I had tried so hard to hold onto. I was thinking about what came next. Because Maureen hadn't been my future. She had been my lesson. A lesson in knowing when to let go. A lesson in choosing myself. And as I stood there, drinking coffee in a home that wasn't mine, I realized something else. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't a house filled with expensive furniture, forced smiles, and unspoken resentments. Home was peace. And for the first time in years, I had finally found it. I glanced at Angela, who was watching me with quiet curiosity, waiting for me to say something. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know where life was going to take me next. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to waste another second waiting. I lifted my coffee cup in a silent toast to the future. A future that was finally mine. And damn, it felt good.